Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. Before we go straight into today's case, I do have a content warning to give you guys. In this video, we do talk about sexual assault. So if that's not something you think you're interested in watching, then this video probably isn't for you. So maybe you can watch some of my other videos or just wait for my next upload. On the 30th of August 2019, Sandy was at her second day of work. She was trying to get a hold of her father, Chris Lategan, who was 85 years old, or her niece, Jesse Hess, who was turning 19 in just 2 months. She kept trying to call them and both of them wouldn't answer their phones, and after a while she started getting a bit worried, so she decided to call one of her neighbors. She called her neighbor and she asked the neighbors to please check to see if her father was alright or if Jesse was in. So the neighbor went and started knocking on the Lategan Hess household door and no one was answering. The neighbor then decided to look through the windows, and as they looked through the bathroom window, they saw Chris Lategan lying on the floor and he was motionless. They immediately told Sandy, and Sandy asked them to please break down the door just to see where Jesse was, and she thought that maybe her father might have fainted, so she just wanted the neighbor to just make sure that her father was okay and just try and see where Jesse was. The neighbors kicked down the door and immediately they found Jesse behind it. There was a brown belt next to her head and she had a long sleeve pink top on. There was a sock and pillowcase that had been stuffed into her mouth, which had been taped shut, as well as her eyes and nose. Chris was found with a black belt near him and he had blood coming from his eyes, nose, mouth and ears, and his legs had been tied together. Sandy immediately left work and rushed home, and she found her father and Jesse. Both of them weren't moving, and immediately they called the police, and Sandy decided that she was just going to wait outside until the police officers arrived. And soon people in the neighborhood and people by the block of flats heard what had happened, and people kept going to the flat to go see what was going on, and police still hadn't arrived. It would take them 3 hours to finally get to the Lategan Hess household. Once police arrived on the scene, Sandy went with them inside, and she still believed that maybe her father and Jesse were just lying on the floor unconscious, and she asked the police officers if they were fine, and police officers confirmed that both of them were dead. Sandy then had the difficult task of calling her mother Kathy, who was at work. She was a preschool teacher, and telling her that her husband as well as her granddaughter, who had dreams of becoming a preacher, had both been murdered. So let me tell you about Jesse Hess and her grandfather, Chris Lategan. There isn't much information about Chris, but there is a lot of information about Jesse, so I do apologize for that. Jesse was born on the 25th of October 2000 to her parents Lance and Brenda Miles. She had an older brother, his name is Darren, and he is 3 years older than her, and when she was just 3 years old, her parents separated. They shared custody of Jesse until her mother moved to the United States, and after this, Jesse and Darren stayed with their extended family, but they would still see their father very often. In 2017, when Jesse was 17 years old, she moved in with her grandparents, Kathy and Chris Lategan, as well as their daughter, Sandy. And as I mentioned, Kathy was a preschool teacher and Chris was retired, so that is why he was home on that day. They all lived in a one-bedroom Beaumont court flat in Parow in the Western Cape, and Jessie was a youth pastor and she also taught at Sunday school. She had dreams of becoming a preacher or a missionary, which is why she wanted to study theology, and she did. She was in her first year of university at the University of Western Cape. Jessie also had a passion for acting and drama, and it was her dream to be well known. Like, you know, some people don't like being well known, they just like their little circle, but Jessie wanted people to know her, not just her family or her community, but just a lot of people. But unfortunately, she would be well known for something that nobody expected. Her brother Darren says that he would always mimic and make fun of Jesse, and that's one of the things he misses most about her, just being an annoying older brother and just making fun of her. Jesse was also very close to her grandmother Kathy, so much so that Kathy says that they were more like friends and not grandmother and granddaughter. Sometimes when Kathy would have to go out, she would start like packing her bags, and Jesse would hear her, and Jesse would immediately get up, get ready so that she could join her grandmother on anything like her grandmother was going to do, whether it was errands, anything. It was just like a mini adventure, and they were going to be able to spend so much time together. On the 28th of August 2019, so just 2 days before the events of today's tragic case, Kathy and Jesse spent some time together, which wasn't unusual. What made it a bit different though on this particular day is that it was a Wednesday, and on Wednesdays Jesse would go to church, but on this day she just wanted to spend time with her grandmother, even though that would mean missing church. And this is something that Kathy would always remember, because her granddaughter chose to spend time with her instead of doing something else that she really loved. On the 30th of August, Jesse had won 5,000 Rand from Hot 104 FM, and when they called her up, she told them that she was saving the money to do something very special for her grandparents as well as her aunt Sandy. And this is because they had taken her in when she was a teenager. She was already grown up, and they just like extended their love towards her and just everything that they had, and she was just so thankful. So she just wanted to thank them in whatever way she could, which is why she was saving. 30 minutes after that phone call, and after she had won the 5,000 Rand from this radio station, her father tried calling her just to congratulate her on winning the money, but the call went unanswered. A couple of hours later, Jesse and Chris's bodies would be found. After police officers arrived on the scene, Sandy went into the kitchen, and this is when she noticed something very strange. She noticed that there were 2 cups on the kitchen counter, and it wasn't just 2 ordinary cups. These were the cups that were used for guests. We know like sometimes our parents have those cups and plates and cutlery that can only be used by visitors. You can't use them, but visitors can. So they had the same thing in the Hess and Lategan household. So when she saw these 2 cups, she knew that there had been visitors in the home, and that was just very suspicious, because police officers were adamant that what had happened to Jesse and Chris was just a robbery gone wrong. But as soon as Sandy saw these 2 cups, she immediately thought that, you know, people were in the house, and it's not like they just broke in and started robbing them and it was a robbery gone wrong. Like Chris or Jesse had went to make tea or coffee or whatever it was and had taken out the visitors' cups. The same night that Jesse and Chris's bodies were found, Kathy and Sandy moved out. Police started investigating, and they couldn't find anything. They then asked the public for any information that would help them find the perpetrator or perpetrators of Jess and Chris's murders, but still they heard nothing, and the months would go on without any new information. This was until the 11th of November, so 2.5 months after the murders. A man in Hanover Park kidnapped 2 sisters. He tied up the one sister, and the other sister, who was 16 years old, he sexually assaulted until their mother walked in on the scene, and the perpetrator then stole 2 cell phones and fled. He was last seen getting into a taxi, and police officers started asking people if they had any information about this man, and 2 days later he was found hiding in Bay, which is about 2.5 hours away from Hanover Park. The suspect had tried to suffocate the 16-year-old, and he had also tied up the other sister, and this MO was very similar to the one of Jesse and Chris's murders. So because of this, police officers thought that the cases were linked. It also came out that just 5 days after Jesse and Chris's murders, this person had been arrested in connection with their murders, but police officers kind of just like looked at him and thought that he wasn't involved in the case, so they then released him. His name was David van Boven. At the time of his arrest, David was 31 years old and he grew up in Hanover Park. He had a very poor upbringing. They were very underprivileged. He was surrounded by gangs, a lot of substance abuse. He didn't finish school. He dropped out when he was in grade 9, and it said that he would engage in a lot of substance abuse, and it is believed that he is part of the 28 gang. He had been convicted of robbery and rape previously and had just been released in December 2018 and was on parole for just 8 months before the murders of Jesse and Chris. What made the whole thing worse is that David is Jesse's mom's cousin, which makes him Jesse's second cousin. The Lategan Hess family were shocked when they found out that the person who had been arrested for the murders of Chris and Jesse was a family member, and not just any family member that they barely see, but someone who was from a family that they were really close with. They would spend a lot of time with them. This was someone who they had seen in the weeks and months before the tragic events of today's case. They would see David all the time, and they were with David in the earlier months when his mom had fallen sick and eventually passed away. So they were so shocked that the person who had done everything was David. Jesse grew up in front of David, and they would see each other during special occasions, family celebrations, family get-togethers. However, they hadn't seen David in the past couple of months because he hadn't attended Jesse and Chris's funerals, as well as Jesse's 19th birthday commemoration, which had happened just 2 weeks before his arrest. Police officers also got messages between Jesse and her boyfriend, and in those messages, I'll put the picture up here so you can just read the messages. You can just like pause and read it, but basically Jesse is telling him about her cousin David, who has like gang affiliations, who engages in drugs, and who's always constantly going to their house, asking for money, asking for food, and how she just feels like so scared. And there was this one time where he went to the house, and luckily they were like, the whole family was home, so nothing happened, and how sometimes David would go to the house with some of his friends. And there was one time when she was home alone and David had come with one of his friends and kept knocking on the door, and she was so terrified of him and what he might do. The second accused was arrested just several days later, and his name is Taslim Buneki Ambrose, and at the time of his arrest, he was 35 years old. Taslim lived on the same street as David, and just like David, he didn't finish school and had dropped out after grade 9. Taslim also had previous convictions. 8 of 10 of Tamlin's previous convictions were for drug possession. The 9th one was when he was walking through a field and he saw a gun on the floor, so he picked it up and he was on his way to the police station when he was arrested. And the 10th one happened, he was like arguing with someone that he knew, so he had borrowed this person some of his tools. This person hadn't returned the tools, so they just started fighting. So it was like a physical assault charge / conviction. And I bring this up because a lot of people compare like David's convictions to that of Tamlin's, and you'll see why. So according to Taslim, this is what happened. On the 30th of August, David went up to him and told him that they were going to one of his family members' houses because this person owed him 500 rand. And then before they got into the car and made their way, they decided to smoke some tick, which isn't something unusual. They would do it all the time. The last time they did it before that morning was literally the night before, so it had only been a couple of hours. They then got into David's white Golf and made their way. Once they got to the block of flats, they went to the door, and David knocked on the door and Chris opened, and Chris saw them and he just asked, like, you know what David wanted, and David asked Chris to please feed them and like give them some food. And Chris told them that he didn't, like, there wasn't much food in the house, but he did say that he could make them some tea. So then he walked into the kitchen and David and Taslim followed him. They were then in the kitchen and Chris had his back towards them, and this is when David decided to strike. So he then walked towards Chris and put his right arm around Chris's neck and started choking him until Chris lost consciousness and fell to the floor. This is when Jesse got out of the bathroom, and this is probably because she heard some people talking, so she just wanted to see who was there. And once she opened the door, she saw her grandfather lying on the floor, and she saw David and Taslim. She then tried to run towards the door, but David was too fast for her and he rugby tackled her to the floor. Taslim says as all of this was happening, he was just in shock, and then David then took off his shoelaces and tied Jesse's hands with this. He then told her to stand up and walk towards the bedroom. As all of this was happening, Taslim was told to remove the TV from the lounge. Then when David went into the room, Taslim tried to get away, so he went to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. It turned out that David had locked the door and taken the key with him. After a while, the door opened just a little bit, and Taslim said that he saw Jesse sitting on the floor and she was completely still. She was still alive at this point. She just wasn't moving, wasn't saying anything, and she had no pants on. David then asked Jesse for the pin for her bank card because they had went through her backpack and had found it. She had given it to them, and then David asked her where the sellotape was. She told them where it was, and then David got the sellotape, went back into the room where Jesse was still sitting on the floor. He then took a pillowcase and a sock and shoved it into her mouth. He then took the brown sellotape and wrapped it around her mouth. He then took a brown belt and he used this to strangle her. And then once he was done, he walked out. He went to where Chris was, still lying on the floor unconscious, took a black belt and strangled him too. 2 television sets, a cell phone and a laptop were stolen from the house, and then David and Taslim left so that they could go sell these things. When he was asked why he hadn't left or tried to do anything, Taslim says that as everything was happening, he noticed that there was a key, I think like on the bedside table. So he took the key, he went to the door and unlocked it, and as he unlocked it, David saw him, and then David shouted at him to take the TV to the car. And the reason why he returned to the flat instead of going to ask people for help is because he was so scared of David and what David might do to him. And he also said that David knew the area more than him, so he was so fearful for his life that he didn't want to do anything to upset David. Whilst David was busy trying to sell some of the stuff, Taslim was sitting in the car and he noticed that there was a phone that David had left behind. So he picked up this phone and he tried calling his father, but before he could tell his father anything or ask his father for help, David appeared, so he had to put the phone down. So Peanut's cell phone records from Chris's phone showed that Taslim did in fact try and call his father, but this phone call went unanswered. David and Taslim had sold all of the items for about 2,800 rand, and David had given Taslim 1,000 rand. Soon the trial began, and David basically just told the court that he did not know who Taslim was. He knew Taslim from the area because they were both from Hanover Park, and he would see Taslim here and there, but he told the court that they weren't friends. They didn't like have conversations with one another. They didn't talk to one another. And he also told them that Taslim would sell drugs for one of the gangs in the community. Police officers then got a witness, and if I'm not mistaken, this witness took the stand in place for his mother, because his mother had unfortunately passed away a couple of months before, but she had basically just written everything down for police officers. So basically Desmond told the courts that on the day of the murders, David had arrived in his white Polo and he had asked them for 100 rand for petrol. He then gave them a tape face, I'm not sure what that is, as well as a ring, and this ring was silver with like green in the middle. I forgot to mention this earlier, but that was Jess's ring and it was missing from the scene. So he gave them those two things as like surety that he was going to come back and give them their money. He said that he had some items in his boot that he was going to sell, so he was definitely going to get money. And when Desmond's mom asked him where he got these items, he kind of alluded to the fact that they were stolen goods. And then later that night he returned and he gave them 100 rand and he left. It's also alleged that David defrauded Jess by using her bank card to withdraw about 100 rand at a spa in Belleville, but some sources say that he withdrew 1,000 rand. So he withdrew between 100 rand to 1,000 rand. The state also called Letitia Fortune, who was David's ex-girlfriend as well as the mother of his child, and when they asked her about David's whereabouts that night, she told them that David had disappeared the night before the incident and only returned the next day after 12. She also told them that she knew Taslim from Hanover Park where they both stayed, but she said that David and Taslim were not friends and that David had no friends and that he was a churchgoer. The pathologist then took the stand, and this is the same pathologist that went to the Hess Lategan household and viewed the bodies on the scene as well as from the autopsy. And the pathologist said that the belt that had been tied around Chris's neck caused blood vessels to rupture as the blood pooled in his head, and this caused blood to flow from his eyes, ears and nose due to pressure. For Jess, she said that Jess had been strangled with a belt and, as you know, had a pillowcase as well as a sock stuffed into her mouth, and that her mouth as well as her eyes and ears had all been sellotaped, or had all been shut with sellotape. She then says that Jess was found naked from the waist down, but the tests that were done to determine if she had been sexually assaulted or not could not confirm because there were no injuries to her genitals. But then the pathologist went on to say that this could be due to the perpetrator using a condom, and this would prevent any like ripping of the genitalia and things like that. She also said that if Jesse was unconscious at the time of the sexual assault, that would also cause there not to be any damage done to her genitals because she would have not been able to put up a fight. During the pathologist's testimony, David yawned, and literally just throughout the trial David didn't seem to care. There was one time where he had lunged towards a media personnel, so this woman was in the court and she was taking pictures, and David just shouted at her and was like, "Why are you taking my pictures?" and then lunged towards her to try and attack her. David also went on to say that he didn't have any sleepless nights because of the trial, because he was not involved in the murders, which is also just a bit weird because at the end of the day Jesse was his second cousin. They knew each other and he also knew Chris, so surely you would maybe be having sleepless nights if you didn't commit the murders but they had falsely arrested you and you wanted to know who had done it, you know, like felt something. Like he literally showed no remorse throughout the entire trial. Taslim Ambrose made a plea deal and he was acquitted of murder, sexual assault, fraud and theft, but he was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment on 2 counts of robbery. David van Boven was found guilty of the murders of 18-year-old Jesse Hess, as well as her 85-year-old grandfather, Chris Lategan, as well as 2 counts of robbery with aggravating circumstances, sexual assault, and fraud. And finally, on the 18th of July 2022, 3 years after the murders took place, countless postponements, and COVID-19, he was sentenced to 2 life terms. Then last year, on the 1st of June 2023, David was sentenced again for the Hanover kidnappings and sexual assault of the sisters, and he was handed another life sentence on 3 counts of rape, 15 years on 2 counts of robbery, and 5 years for kidnapping. After David's sentencing, Jesse's father said, "God will give them what they deserve. I just hope that they will stay for the whole sentence and not get parole. That's all I want." And that's it for today's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out my channel a lot. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.